From Washington, the McLaughlin Group, the American original. For over 3 decades, the sharpest minds, best sources, hardest talk.
Issue 1, Old Europe still with us?
Standing together and using our freedom to improve the lives of not only our citizens but people around the world is what makes France not only America's oldest ally but also one of our closest allies.
France and the United States are two countries which, due to their history and their place in history, but also due to their seat as permanent members of the UN Security Councils, can act on security throughout the world for freedom, democracy, the rule of law.
President Obama hosted French President François Hollande this week. The two leaders stressed the vital points of the Franco-American relationship. What are they? 1. Iran. Both France and the U.S. are vigorously pushing Iran to limit its nuclear program.
We agree that next week's talks in Vienna will be an opportunity for Iran to show that it is serious about a comprehensive solution that assures the world that its nuclear program is for peaceful purposes only.
2. Syria. President Hollande was the most vocal supporter of President Obama's early plan to strike Syria last September with aircraft carrier-launched missiles to destroy the Assad regime's chemical weapons stockpiles. But Obama's threat of this military force worried the U.S. Congress and stalwart allies, including the Brits, who backed away from it. But Hollande supported the strategy. 3. Africa. French troops are on the ground in countries like Mali and the Central African Republic, fighting Islamists and backed by U.S. intelligence and airlift support. 4. Trade ties. As part of the EU, the European Union, France is negotiating with the U.S. on an EU-U.S. transatlantic trade deal. If this deal were to come to fruition, it would establish the largest free trade zone in the world, as Jose Barroso, the president of the European Commission, tells us, calling it a quote-unquote game changer. While Monsieur Hollande was in town, he visited Monticello, home of America's most famous Francophile, the U.S.'s third president and author of the Declaration of Independence, the multi-talented Thomas Jefferson. And on Tuesday night, President Hollande received le traitement royal at a state dinner in his honor. France's president came stag to the event, as he was without his longtime partner, Valérie Trierweiler, and without his latest squeeze, French actress Julie Gayet.
Question, what is driving this rapprochement between Presidents Hollande and Obama? Pat Buchanan.
Well, both of them want to deal in foreign policy, and Obama because he's pretty much, blocked here in D.C. But I will say this, Hollande he's about 20% popularity. Unemployment is over 10% in France. He's really losing the battle against Germany for preeminence. But far more than that, John, the European Union is in very serious trouble. This May, they're going to have parliamentary elections for the European Union, and these populist sovereignty parties, these anti-immigrant parties, the UKIP in England, the Front, Marine Le Pen's Front in France, the party in Holland, they're going to have a sweeping victory and a very dramatic effect because they want to destroy the European Union. The whole institution is very much in shape. You've got the North-South battle between, they're tired of bailing folks out. And in England, look what they got. They got not only got the European Independence Party wants to get out of the EU. In September, they got a vote in Scotland where they want to get out of Great Britain. So what's happening is tribalism, if you will, is trumping over transnationalism in the continent of Europe.
Yeah, in England, they don't like the EU currency, and they want their own currencies. There's that angle, too.
Well, the rise of the right in France and these other countries has more to do with the lack of jobs and the sluggish economy than it does with the drive to dismantle the EU. And while he was here, President Hollande visited Silicon Valley trying to get some ideas and trying to recruit some businesses because his 75% tax on the wealthy has backfired. And I think he's trying to rethink some of his economic policies. He's at 19% popularity, which is pretty pathetic. But if the president appreciates him, and in part the French press is portraying this visit and this elaborate state dinner as a consolation prize for not going ahead with missile strikes in Syria, because Hollande had said he would do that, and he didn't seek permission from his parliament, and then the president backed away from it, and it was an embarrassing moment for the French president. But these two leaders are clinging to each other in part because they're both going through hard times, and they need each other, and Obama appreciates the muscular approach that Hollande has towards foreign policy.
Do you think this rapprochement between Hollande and Obama is partially motivated by the fact that his relationships, our relationships with Germany, are strained due to a number of reasons, including the listening on the telephone of what the head of Germany was saying?
Entirely possible, John. However, I think really what's happening here is not necessarily a giant rapprochement or a long-term change. I think that ideologically, the Obama administration is pretty close to Hollande. Hollande is a social democrat. Obama is a social democrat. They both like foreign policy that has teeth to it and going after Islamists. Okay, so the two have kind of come together on this. And the timing was right for Hollande to come now because he's trying to escape this domestic scandal where he had an affair and it's blown up in his face in France. And coming to the United States, the French public, regardless of their own domestic political situation, Obama is pretty popular there. Because if you want to make references back to old Europe and Donald Rumsfeld complaining in the post 9/11 years about how France and Germany would not support American military adventurism, Obama has ended that. Obama in the last 5 years got the United States out of Iraq. The French are happy about that. So it's a safe bet for Hollande domestically to come to Washington and be seen as close to this intellectual, groundbreaking, forward-thinking American president. The extent to which it trumps Germany's relationship with the United States, I don't think so.
Was Merkel annoyed, vexed at Nuland's unfortunate adjective that she used to describe the European Union, when she, Merkel, is the principal engine behind the European Union?
That's right. I think that was not well received by Merkel, to put it mildly, because obviously she is, as you say, the leader of that whole constituency in Europe. So I don't think she was very happy about that. I also don't think she's very happy about the Obama administration, and she has not been for quite a while. Whereas Hollande, who has, shall we say, unique problems in France at this stage of the game, this was a perfect escape for him, and it's, as you say, the kind of public reaction that he got, both here and in Europe, and France in particular, helped him.
Do you recall what the attitude towards France was on the outskirts of our move towards Iraq? We described, we wouldn't use the word French fries, would we?
Freedom fries.
Freedom fries,
it
right.
was contemptuous. They were called, what, some kind of surrender monkeys and all this other stuff.
Cheese-eating surrender monkeys.
Well, to give you an idea of
very hostile to them.
Yeah, to give you an idea of how Americans have changed, according to a Gallup poll, 34% of Americans viewed France favorably in 2003. Today, 78% of Americans view France favorably.
They were right on Iraq.
Let's also not forget that, America's top diplomat in John Kerry, one of the few languages that he actually speaks fluently is French. And on the trips that he's made to Europe, he's always seen out and about speaking French. We may not see that here very much in the United States, and it doesn't play well domestically here, but the French love that because to speak the French language to the French is a sign of respect. And I think there's an intellectual elite in the foreign policy community in Washington that also loves that and thinks here we are showing the French that we're as sophisticated as...
Is that complimentary, by the way, to the elite in Washington and the State Department, the striped suit set?
They're the same thing.
As a presidential candidate, Kerry was mocked for being able to speak French. And,
domestically.
Yeah, exactly.
You shouldn't have gone windsurfing.
Well,
and
Americans had to be reminded that the French stood with us in our revolution against the British.
Did you see
stalwart friends.
how Kerry has gone east now? He's over there in several countries. Is he trying to stay away from that situation in Europe?
He's not trying to stay away from any situation.
He's in
everything.
He's in the Israeli-Palestinian peace. He's in Syria. He's in the Syrian, Iran talk. He's got an enormous...
So you're a big fan?
No, I will say he is taking tremendous risks. He's trying to do an awful lot. There's a real potential. A lot of it could blow up. But there's a possibility some of it could succeed.
He has enormous energy. It's really extraordinary. He's always had that.
And you said in this program, you agreed with him to negotiate now on the Arab-Israeli problem.
Absolutely. I've known him forever, okay? Before he even entered politics. We were both living in the same state at that point. I supported him the first time he ran. But I will say the guy's got enormous energy. He's very smart. He's very committed. I don't know that I'm going to agree with all of his policies, but I do agree with the efforts he's putting in.
He's a very engaging man. Don't forget, the McLaughlin Group has its own website, and you can watch this program or earlier programs on the web at any time from anywhere in the world at McLaughlin.com. Issue 2, Death Row.
The governor of Washington State, Jay Inslee, Democrat, announced this week that he is suspending all executions in his state as long as he, Inslee, remains in office. Currently, there are 9 prisoners in Washington State who are on death row. They will not go free, but they will not be executed, at least as long as Governor Inslee, a first-term governor, is in office. In making his decision, Governor Inslee cited problems with the capital punishment system, including the inconsistency as to how it is applied. The governor pointed out that Washington State's current capital punishment system was put in place in 1981, 32 years ago. Since then, more than 1/2 of the state's 32 imposed death sentences have been overturned. Governor Inslee says this, quote, "When the ultimate decision is death, there is too much at stake to accept an imperfect system," unquote. The governor's action does not sit well with everyone, including Jay Rodney, the ranking Republican on Washington State's House Judiciary Committee, who disagrees with the governor. Quote, "I think this is cruel to families of victims. Justice should not be basically put on hiatus," unquote. Governor Inslee now joins other governors who in recent years have issued stays of execution on their watch, including Governor John Kitzhaber of Oregon and Governor John Hickenlooper of Colorado. The number of executions overall has also dropped in the U.S. by 60% nationwide since highs in the 1990s. Nevertheless, a majority of U.S. states, 32, do have capital punishment, as compared to 18 states where it is outlawed.
Question: if Governor Inslee feels so negatively about capital punishment, why hasn't he proposed legislation to outlaw it in Washington State, Eleanor Cliff?
Because it's a lot easier to just order a reprieve than it is to go through all the mechanics of passing a law. And this notion of Republicans, it was begun by a Republican governor in 2000, George Ryan in Illinois. This current wave are all Democratic governors, but most of them are just issuing these reprieves. And Maryland did change their law, so it can be done. But it seems to me that people are really waking up to the fact that, one, there are too many mistakes made, and that's been documented in Washington States. Two, it's incredibly expensive to have the capital punishment because you go through years and years of appeals, and you might as well just incarcerate people, and it's a lot cheaper. And I think there's really a moral basis to this. People are sickened by what they see as a barbaric act, and the fact that some of the medications they used haven't worked properly, have really added to the public's discomfort with this. So I think the trend is definitely to do away with capital punishment.
Shouldn't the only criterion be in cases of capital punishment or the kind of punishment that's inflicted on the field of war be your own security? And it has to be free of what can be interpreted to be reprisal against the criminal.
It's such an interesting issue, John, because capital punishment here is politicized at this granular level where the governor of Washington can get a bump with his liberal base by passing a measure to say we won't do this. But it's not used in a political sense as if we're going to show that an execution of somebody is to deter people from using crimes. If you look around the world, the United States has done a relatively tiny number of executions compared to some of our adversaries. There were more than 300 in China in the last year. In Iran, there are some sources that say that there were more than 600 executions. And these are executions that are public hangings of people from construction.
I don't
crews.
think we look. I don't
So
think we look to those countries
We don't look
for
to those countries, but we also
advice.
I think Eleanor made a good point about the expense of going through this appeals process, which has now been exacerbated by science and DNA testing, which shows that
That's
all
exactly,
of these
but
people
you leave it to
wrongly
the individual
convicted.
states. I agree with Eleanor. You ought to be absolutely sure you've got the right person, John. But to your point, do you think the people that we captured after World War II, the Nazis we put on trial at Nuremberg for mass murder, they didn't threaten us at all, that we should not have put them to death? What is the proper punishment there? As for deterrence, why is the Godfather the safest man in the yard in the prison? Because when he suggests he's going to impose a death penalty, there isn't any appeal and it is immediate. Of course it is a deterrent. Some cases, look at Holder is going after this fellow that did the Boston Marathon bombing. What is the right punishment for a guy that blows people apart, little children?
It's in the Constitution. Excessive bail shall not be required, nor excessive fines imposed, nor cruel and unusual punishment inflicted. When you take someone's life,
why do you say it's cruel and unusual when they had the death penalty in every state when the Constitution was ratified?
Unusual means you're taking a person's life.
We've evolved.
Well, it is. I mean, look, it's not altogether rare. Look at you, whether Texas has it, other states
I'm
don't
attacking
want
the premise that the state can do it in any instance.
Well, where do you get that? Since the Constitution,
I get it because of reverence for human life.
Well, I mean, why don't you protect innocent human life, John?
Well, I do protect innocent human life.
Well, how do you punish people that take innocent human life as a way of life?
Jail them.
You incarcerate
Put them away.
Why?
Incarcerate them.
And so the victims pay for this guy's room, board, medication for the rest of his life? The victims of the crime?
Well, that's a
justice?
curious way of putting it. The victims are not doing it alone.
It's a truthful way of putting it.
I get the feeling Pat supports capital punishment.
Oh.
In some cases.
Right.
Look, I saw...
Hang, draw, and quarter them.
I saw two guys executed in Missouri, and neither of them was guilty of murder, but the crimes they committed, they deserved it.
Do you think that
individual feelings about individual cases are certainly understood, and I have great sympathy with the victims of these crimes. But as a state policy, I just don't think that we're moving in the direction of expanding capital punishment.
I think you're right about the direction, and I think it ought to be rare, and you ought to be sure, but you got to have it.
We
putting him
can't
right
be
down on the
sure.
level
That's
of
the
the
problem.
criminal.
You think that you...
Oh, you are. No question about it.
And you
in
think
refusing to carry out a law he disagrees with is instantly emulating Obama. Here's what's behind that. Political chief executives at all levels of government are likely to emulate Obama's pen and phone strategy of governing without the legislature or city council. They will be emboldened to stretch executive authority to its limits.
John, is this
now,
the guy
that's
that launches...
Obama's doing that. You know that.
This is a guy that launches...
And the governor was doing it, too, in this instance.
Although he
Obama's
said that
launching drone strikes and killing people.
Yes, he is.
And they're not in the field of battle, are they? Al-Waki was just going along in a car.
I'm only analogizing one element.
Al-Waki had lived?
No, I think in that case, I agree with Obama.
Even though we didn't have a court that decided that he was guilty and knew for sure.
I would say this: you should know for sure.
Sure statements, but you're also skirting around and taking the facts where you want them to fit.
Conflating a lot of different
you
issues.
can't always be sure, because you'll be dead.
But wartime is
we
not
are
what
in
we're talking
wartime right
about.
now or not?
We were in wartime in Yemen, our guys. Yes.
Okay.
You know what the planet?
War on terror.
You know what the countries of the world feel about abolishing capital punishment? How many there are? 140. You know, the retentionists, those who want to claim, keep them, 58. So the number of countries that want to...
The UN is going to decide what we do here.
I didn't say UN. This is just the catalog of the countries, the number of the countries who want to abolish it.
It's more appropriate
Think about it some more, Pat, will you? Issue 3, Rand's writ.
This, we believe, will be a historic lawsuit. We think it may well be the largest class action lawsuit ever filed on behalf of the Bill of Rights.
Republican Senator Rand Paul served up President Obama a Valentine's Day present this week, namely papers naming Mr. Obama and the National Security Agency, or NSA, as co-defendants in a lawsuit. The class action lawsuit, which is being litigated by former Virginia Attorney General Ken Cuccinelli, seeks to expunge the phone records and metadata collected by the NSA's domestic surveillance program on some 386,026 plaintiffs.
Question. The essence of Rand Paul's lawsuit holds that the NSA searches violate the U.S. Constitution's Fourth Amendment, notably its clause which protects against arbitrary search and seizure. And Rand Paul, I want to know whether Rand Paul is on solid ground.
Well, we're going to find out. It's going to go to the courts, it's going to go to the Supreme Court, and we're going to find out. I don't want to insert myself in that particular part of it, but I will say this about this, okay? There are situations, it seems to me, where this is valid. I mean, I think this is valid. If we are to believe people who really know about this, they said that we stopped a number of major terrorist attacks against the United States as a result of the information which we gleaned from all of this, shall we say, eavesdropping. Well, I believe that, and I think the consequences for this country, if we had had 2 or 3 more terrorist attacks, would have been disastrous. So in one sense, I think it was to protect the United States, and I support it to that extent.
Some of his arguments make a lot of sense. That his lawsuit will never reach the Supreme Court. It's a joke. It's totally partisan. He stepped all over whatever credibility it had, and Guy knows a lot more about it than I do.
There have already been 2 cases, one involving Verizon, the other involving the ACLU, that were decided different ways. So the stage is set for this thing to go all the way to the Supreme Court. Why Rand Paul is jumping in on this, trying to create a class action suit.
You're having trouble figuring out what he wants to do?
I think what it does is, here's what I'll say about Rand Paul. He is one of the most refreshing and interesting voices in the U.S. Senate right now,
also
because he is so different. However, a move like this to create a class action suit exposes him as the libertarian activist that he is.
He's not big enough to get him in the finals.
Yeah, well, let's eliminate all the flattery about him. Issue 4, Washington's regulation tsunami.
It's a new year, and in Washington, that means new federal regulations. And new federal regs means battles royal featuring lawmakers, lobbyists, and interested parties. Here are the bigger regulatory fights that the Hill newspaper anticipates. Item: Obamacare birth control mandate. It's rankling religious groups and some conservatives. The Supreme Court has agreed to rule on whether contraception must be offered to workers under employer health insurance plans. Item: power plant emissions. Standards are due from the Environmental Protection Agency that will limit carbon emissions from existing power plants. The coal industry, for one, is crying foul. Item: e-cigarettes and e-cigars. Regulations on both, courtesy of the FDA, Food and Drug Administration. Item: cell phone calls on plane. Originally banned for safety reasons, but that ban may be lifted even though the public likes the ban. Polling shows that plane passengers don't want to sit and listen to loud phone calls during the flights that they take. Item: water, water everywhere. The EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, wants the power to regulate small bodies of water. Ponds, streams, brooks. Item: smog. Standards to ease ozone levels are expected from the EPA. Item: restaurant menu item calorie counts. Chain restaurants and vending machines will be required to supply them. Calorie counts on items. Item: rear view cameras, not mirrors, cameras on cars, to alert drivers to movement at the rear of their vehicles when backing up so that passerbys won't be hit. Such rear-view cameras may be required on all automobiles. Item: executive pay transparency. A rule that would compel companies to disclose the pay gap between CEOs and average workers.
Question: will President Obama try to push his agenda through a massive expansion of federal regulations and federal oversight in 2014? Mort Zuckerman, what do you think?
Oh, I think without question he's going to do this. I think that he's already stated this, that since he doesn't seem to be able to get much through Congress, that he's going to do whatever he can through executive action. It's going to create a fair amount of controversy, but we have a political system that seems to be more or less paralyzed, and I can understand why the president wants to do it.
And one by one, I'm for every one of those regulations that you just cited, and I suspect that there's public approval behind everyone. Maybe the coal industry doesn't like the fact that coal emissions should be regulated.
Half of the things that were brought up there are absurd, and the idea
which ones?
Putting calories on vending machines, cameras behind cars. Well, we can't drive cars with a mirror like we have since the automobile was invented.
And I'd like to know what I'm buying.
But should the companies that make the cars require that all cars have that? It's ridiculous.
Well,
there are a couple of issues, however, just to finish, that were very important on there, such as environmental regulations on smog. And I think this is where Obama will use the executive powers on one or two key issues that he knows Democrats want and will support, and all the power to him on the environment.
But this is usurping the authority of a democratic republic. These big decisions, that one on CO2, that's very important, XL pipeline, a lot of these things should be made by legislators, and they should be held accountable, not by bureaucrats and judges whom we cannot hold accountable.
Would be, however, we don't have time in the legislature to address some of these things.
We don't have time to do what you want to do.
Because they need to try and overturn Obamacare again.
Pat, you served two presidents, and they did plenty of regulations on their side too. That's right.
It's the second mistake he made.
Barack Obama likes this stuff. He wants to have the,
sure.
some say, the imperial presidency.
Well, sure. The Congress is becoming increasingly weak and irrelevant to what's going on.
He assigned fewer executive orders than any of his predecessors.
But I mean,
I hope he makes up for it in the next couple of years.
Has it become increasingly weak, or has it made itself increasingly weak?
It's surrendered a lot of power, and it's had powers taken away from it.
Focusing on 50 attempts to overturn a health care law.
But the Supreme Court grabs a decision on homosexuality, it grabs a decision on abortion, it grabs a decision on racial integration. These things should be decided by legislators.
Is on the ropes.
No, I don't think it's on the ropes.
That's how our court system works.
I think he's in tough shape, but I think he's got a very tough 3 years coming up, but I think there's a lot of things the president can do.
Predictions, Pat.
As I mentioned, a tremendous blow to the EU in these May votes for Parliament in Strasbourg.
UAW efforts to unionize Volkswagen plant in Tennessee. Results of that vote will tell the story of the union fight in this country for decades to come.
Families divided on the Korean Peninsula for 60 years get to reunite for the first time in the coming week.
The increasing weakness of the economy this year and the unpopularity of the president means that the Republicans will gain control of the Senate in the elections coming up.
This frigid winter of 2014 will cause public opinion to switch dramatically against climate change. Those theorists who persist in saying that the planet is being heated by carbon emissions in a doomsday scenario. Happy Valentine's Day weekend. Love is in the air.